reformer and constitutional architect. Each year, this event brings together scholars, activists, students, lawyers to reflect on Dr. Ambedkar's enduring legacy. Throughout provoking discussions and lectures, the program highlights the relevance of Ambedkar's ideas in contemporary India, encouraging critical engagement with issues of equity and inclusion in today's society. We are especially proud of CEDE's Dr. Ambedkar Memorial Lecture Series, an initiative aimed at honoring the legacy of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, whose unwavering commitment to social justice, equality and constitutionalism continues to guide us. Previous lectures have been delivered by some of the most influential voices in law and academia, former Chief Justice Dr. D.Y. Chandrachud, former Justice Dr. S. Muralidhar, Professor Michael Klarman from Harvard Law School, Professor Ajantha Subramanian City University of New York. With this note, I would like to invite Ms. Tisha Bardekar, our founding trustee of CEDE, to give us the introduction about our initiative CEDE. Ms. Bardekar is an advocate practicing in the Supreme Court of India. She is also a Fulbright scholar and had done her LLM from Columbia Law School. Ms. Bardekar.
Hi, everyone. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce CEDE, this organization which Anurag, Bhaskar, Avinash Matthews, and I founded back in 2020. So CEDE basically stands for Community for Eradication of Discrimination in Education and Employment. And this acronym is really important because we are talking about seeding capital, right? And we are focused on the legal profession. But we are also saying that if one needs to see more representation and diversity in the legal profession, we will have to talk about seeding social, educational, cultural capital as well. So CEDE was founded, like I said, in 2020. And the idea was that we have to create a collective of lawyers, law firms, judges, organizations, and individuals who are committed to making the legal profession more representative, equitable of all sections of society. At the heart of our work lies a simple yet powerful belief that justice is impossible without representation for the historically marginalized communities. This is because unequal access to positions of power, networks, and opportunities has become a defining feature of the Indian legal system. It is unfortunate that in the last 75 years of history of the Supreme Court, there have only been 7 justices from scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities. This stark underrepresentation of oppressed groups in the higher echelons of the legal profession is not accidental, but it is systemic. Existing systems of reservation have done very little to remedy this imbalance, primarily because power in the legal universe, unlike in the public sector jobs, is concentrated in the hands of private actors, especially of individuals. Influxes of money can only do so much. Social and educational capital are far more effective tools for maintaining the existing hierarchies. If we are serious about change, the seeding and the redistribution of social and educational capital is essential. Only then can we set off on a cycle of increased representation leading to a more just and equitable legal system. Through CEDE, we are building a network of lawyers, law firms, and organizations who are not just aware of this deep imbalance, but they are actually committed to doing their part to change this. We believe that true justice is impossible without representation from the historically marginalized communities. So what does CEDE do? Like, enough about me ranting about all of this, but what do we actually do? For some of you who are not aware of our work, we started CEDE, like I said, 4 years ago. And our flagship program is an internship mentorship program, where on the one hand, we have some very established, committed lawyers, some of whom are actually here today, and thank you for coming, who commit to providing one paid internship to a student from marginalized community in a year, right? And as a result of this commitment of close to 100 lawyers, what we have is that in the last 4 years, we've managed to arrange around 400 paid internships for students from marginalized communities. We've been successful in facilitating 10 job placements in the legal sector. We have supported 2 fully funded overseas LLM admissions. We have supported 1 candidate in his selection for the Lamb Fellowship. We have conducted close to 20 capacity building sessions on various topics ranging from legal writing to legal research for students from marginalized communities. And we've built a community of close to 1,000 students and young lawyers from the marginalized community. We've also empaneled close to 100 advocates, law firms, and NGOs that offer us mentorship and internships. So these are more than just numbers, according to us. We believe that they represent lives changed, and we've witnessed that because we've been in touch with some of these students. Some of them are also here, and we take immense pride in seeing their journey. But they've also created pathways and opened pathways in this system, in this legal profession, that often always closes doors for law students and lawyers from marginalized communities. Coming to what lies ahead for CEDE and what we plan to do, we think that we're only getting started. It's just been 4 years. But in the coming years, we plan to launch bridge courses. I don't like the term bridge because I don't think there is anything to bridge that way. But some kind of courses and training that we can provide to strengthen the core skills of law students from marginalized communities. Enroll more lawyers and organizations to widen our internship and mentorship program. Roll out scholarships for students from marginalized communities. We often see that we are offering internships to these students, but most of the students are unable to travel to Delhi or cannot find accommodation or do not have the resources to really do that internship, right? So it's not enough to just offer a paid internship, but also to ensure that they can go to all these good chambers and law firms where their accommodation and travel is also taken care of. And we also want to build a structured and sustained capacity building program in the long term. So with this, I think I will hand it over to Rajesh. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you, Disha, for taking us through the CEDE's journey and the future endeavor. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Anurag Bhaskar, founding trustee of CEDE and author of the Foresighted Ambedkar, to introduce about Justice Bhat.
Thank you, Rajesh. Before I start, I request everyone who is standing, so there are a few vacant seats here, so you can come. So we are grateful to Honorable Justice Bhat for agreeing to deliver the 5th Dr. Ambedkar lecture today. So Justice Bhat did his BA Honours in English from Hindu College, University of Delhi, and obtained a LLB degree from Campus Law Center, Faculty of Law, University of Delhi in 1982. He enrolled as an advocate with the Delhi Bar Council in 1982 and practiced in the Supreme Court, where he was enrolled as an advocate on record in 1989. He practiced in various fields in public law, employment, education, and constitutional disputes, and appeared in several important cases before the constitution benches of the Supreme Court during his legal career. He was appointed as an additional judge of the Delhi High Court in 2004 and as a permanent judge in 2006. He was then elevated as the Chief Justice of High Court of Rajasthan in 2019, and he was elevated as a judge of the Supreme Court in September 2019. Justice Bhat, after having a celebrated career, retired from the bench in October 2023, and after his retirement, he has been guiding the nation in various capacities. Justice Bhat's judgment have been landmark in many aspects. I was recently reading his judgment in Dr. Balram Singh versus Union of India, where he reshaped the compensation jurisprudence for deaths under manual scavenging, and has been a landmark judgment in the field of social justice. I personally had the privilege of assisting him when he was a judge in the court, when he was chairing the accessibility committee, and the scheme when the framing of the law clerk scheme was happening. So thank you, sir, once again for agreeing to come. Thank you so much, Rajesh.
Now it's time to facilitate Honorable Justice Bhat. To facilitate Justice Bhat, I would like to invite our fellows, H.J. Khandekar Fellow, Mr. Kundan Kumar, and our former fellow, Advocate Arslan Ahmed. Mr. Kundan has been recently selected as Lamb Fellow. With this note, I would like to invite Honorable Justice Bhat to deliver the 5th Dr. Ambedkar Memorial Lecture.
Thank you. Good evening to all of you. Good evening to CEDE, especially Anurag Bhaskar and Disha Wadekar, who reached out to me. And the notice given to me was a bit short, but then I felt this was too good an opportunity and a great an opportunity to pass up. So forgive me if my presentation or speech, this 5th Memorial Ambedkar speech, falls short of your expectations. Just as an aside, before I begin, this memento or gift that you have given me, I think I will return because I already have a copy. And it's a very useful resource, very well written, and I would commend and congratulate Anurag for that achievement. All of you are aware of what Ambedkar is and what he stood for and his life's journeys. So I think it's a mandatory thing for me to briefly outline what he did and how he came up, and then pass on to the main part of the theme of the speech, which is representation as justice. Ambedkar is one of the most important, I would say, central figures in India's modern history. As a thinker, a reformer, and a symbol of resilience, his ideas continue to resonate and influence the country's democratic journey. As the principal architect of the Constitution, Ambedkar laid the foundation for the Indian Republic, a modern Indian Republic grounded in equality, liberty, and fraternity. His vision also stretched far beyond the confines of constitutional framework. He challenged caste hierarchies, redefined social justice, and worked toward building a society rooted in dignity and inclusion. Known popularly as Baba Saheb, Ambedkar was born on 14th April 1891 in Mau, a very small town in central India, to a Mahar family. The Mahars were one of the largest untouchable castes of India, traditionally who used to serve as village servants for the headmen, overlords, and other dominant caste groups in villages. In 1913, Ambedkar graduated from Elphinstone College, Bombay, with a BA in English and Persian. And before that, I am sure many of you have read, and for those who have not read, his travails as a student are indescribable. Made to sit on a gunny sack, which he was not allowed to keep in the school. I think he spent a very traumatic childhood. He had to carry the gunny sack with him back home because nobody was willing to touch it. Even the water that he wanted to, when he was thirsty, if he wanted water, he had to request the teacher, and the teacher was not allowed to open the tap, or rather, let out the water. It was the peon who could do it, and if the peon was missing, as he was many times, young Ambedkar had to go back thirsty. So this is the kind of life he began his journey in. And if you take that as the starting point, the way he saw the vision that he gave us, and the Constitution which he largely was instrumental in, especially the social justice and the anti-discrimination parts, which he was key to authoring, is the greatest boon, I would say, not only to India but to humanity. I think some of the provisions, particularly like Article 15.3 and 15 and 16, are unique gifts which India can proudly proclaim are ours and teach and give as a teacher to the world. Ambedkar went on to earn 2 doctorates in economics, first from Columbia University and later at the London School of Economics. Whilst in London, he also completed his legal training and was called to the bar at Gray's Inn. In 1924, he returned to Bombay. Despite his extensive education from some of the world's leading institutions, he continued to encounter caste-based discrimination and inequalities, which paved the way for his emergence as a thinker, organizer, and a legal and social reformist. Just as an aside, away from my written text, is an interesting nugget, which is that Ambedkar was helped by the Maharaja of Baroda, Sayaji Rao Gaikwad. So Sayaji Rao Gaikwad, a very unusual figure of the times, because prior to funding Ambedkar, he had employed Aurobindo in the state, and Aurobindo's writings were far ahead of the times, and that provoked the Gaikwad into thinking, and he funded Ambedkar. Not only that, when Ambedkar came back with his doctorates, he gave him employment in the state of Baroda. But unfortunately for Ambedkar, he found discrimination in the workplace. So he had to leave that employment, he had to leave the job. So such was the hold of caste, such was caste entrenchment in our society. In 1926, he was appointed to the Bombay's Legislative Council, where he actively challenged both the colonial government and Indian nationalists for their regressive and oppressive economic, social, and political practices. His intervention in the emergent movement for both Indian nationalist self-determination included a call for provincial autonomy, adult suffrage, and an overhaul of the system of representation. Later, despite confirmation from the Mahad City Council that its Chawadar Lake was open to use for members from the supposedly untouchable castes, the city's upper caste Hindus continued to deny the latter access to water from the lake. Ambedkar, in response, led the Mahad Satyagraha. So he is also a participant in mass movements demanding access to water for the untouchable castes. He proceeded to drink the water from the lake, followed by thousands of his followers. Subsequently, upper caste Hindus opposed his actions and purified the lake, prompting Ambedkar to launch a second agitation and declare, "We are resorting to this satyagraha not because we believe that the water of this particular tank has any exceptional qualities, but to establish our natural rights as citizens and human beings." At this second agitation in December 1927, he called for a new code, and this you can trace the blueprint for our preamble for our constitution, which provided for freedom and equal rights to those who are deprived of human respect and dignity. This rapidly grew into a wider national level movement for ending caste and gender-based inequalities. He made his first effort to address the need for a separate political representation for Dalits before the Franchise Committee in the form of a statement known as Evidence before the Southborough Committee. In this, he asserted that Dalits were the only group that needed separate electorates. You can see the evolution of his thinking. He called out for a separate electorate to secure what he termed as personal representation. Later, the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms did not grant his proposal for separate electorates. It addressed the absence of representation by including a provision for nomination of Dalits into provincial legislatures. The government made these nominations. Ambedkar voiced vehement opposition to the proposal for nomination. In 1928, he spoke again on political representations, this time before the Simon Commission. He used his opportunity to elaborate on the disadvantage of separate electorates and to express his desire for reserved seats to retain personal representation. He insisted that seats be reserved for Dalits in joint electorates, stipulating that the British government grant the right to vote to every Dalit in the country above the age of 21. He said that separate electorates would be necessary if the government did not grant universal adult suffrage to Dalits. The Simon Commission awarded Dalits reserved seats but did not grant them universal adult suffrage. So you can see the progress slow. However, the British government failed to implement the suggestions of the Commission in the face of opposition by the Congress. To find a solution, the government held a roundtable conference, the first and second in 1930 and 1932. On 16th August 1932, the Prime Minister of England presented the Communal Award since there was no agreement over the question of political representation. This granted separate electorates for voting in elections to choose their representatives to Europeans, Anglo-Indians, Indian Christians, Sikhs and Muslims, including Dalits. To this, Gandhi began his fast unto death as a protest against establishing separate electoral constituencies to Dalits. On 24th September 1932, Ambedkar signed the Pune Pact with Hindu leaders to save Gandhi's life in a bid not to endanger communal harmony in the context of tensions of the freedom movement. The Pune Pact allocated 148 reserved seats to Dalits in joint electorates, an increase over 71 seats designated for Dalits in the Communal Award. The pact also called for non-discrimination of depressed classes in public services and hence the CEDE for your reservations in government and public services. This developed a model of joint electorates that included reserved seats so that Dalits could participate in the political process. While the right to contest an election for a reserved seat in a joint electorate was limited to a community, the right to vote was not. Everyone eligible to vote in general constituencies, including voters from groups different from the community for which the government reserved the seat, had the right to cast their votes. So this is the model that we accepted. No separate electorates, but reserved seats. The election officer declared a candidate elected from a reserved seat only if one candidate from the community was contesting the reserved seat. However, if there were several candidates, he declared the one with the most votes elected. The Pune Pact was seen as putting an end to the long-standing issue of Dalit political representation in provincial assemblies. However, these electoral arrangements remained among the most contentious topics in Indian politics till 1947. In 1947, he joined the India's Constituent Assembly. Following independence on 15th August 1947, he was appointed as Law Minister in post-colonial India's first cabinet. Shortly after, he was appointed as member and later became chair of the drafting committee of the Assembly, tasked with drafting the Constitution. In a memorandum to the Assembly in 1947, Ambedkar demanded to repeal joint electorates established by the Pune Pact and replace them with separate electorates. He contended that Dalit candidates who received the lowest number of votes in the primaries ended up winning the final polls in the provinces because upper caste Hindus voted for these failed candidates. Since caste Hindu voters outnumbered Dalit voters in a joint electorate, a Dalit candidate could not win an election if he refused, Ambedkar stated, to agree to be a nominee of Hindus and a tool in their hands. Thus, to Ambedkar, Dalit candidates elected in a joint electorate with caste Hindu votes were puppets rather than true representatives of Dalit interests. The Pune Pact was a historic moment in India's constitutional and political history. It brought to bear the tensions between the depressed classes and caste Hindus, one that would continue to haunt the freedom movement and negotiations between Indians and British. To a large extent, the pact further reinforced and augmented the claim that depressed classes were a political minority, or at least a politically marginalized group for the longest time, whose interests could not be ignored while drawing up the constitutional future of India. To Ambedkar, representations of opinions and personal representation are both fundamental requirements. His concept of personal representation reflected his belief that every person should have an equal voice in a representative democracy and his commitment to the notion of popular sovereignty. To be personally represented is to be assured of being able to choose and to be represented in legislative proceedings by a representative of one's choosing. Even more crucially, personal representation reflects the expressive significance of experiencing one's self in Parliament, although in a vicarious capacity, via the participation of an individual similar to oneself. I am not entering into the dialectics and the debate as to how far we have progressed or regressed from that view, but just to place on record that this is his view, and perhaps this was the vision of our constitutional framers. Furthermore, to Ambedkar, a group's participation and opinion must be successful in terms of the choices taken in the assemblies to gain personal representation. Simple physical representation is insufficient. Since caste Hindus often see Dalits as polluted non-individuals and are not even humans, their very participation in Parliament is an act that recognizes Dalits as moral and legal individuals. So this was the first break, that you recognize that everyone is equal, that everyone is a human being, and his worth, at least in political terms, is the same as yours. Ambedkar recommended using separate electorates and reserved seats to give historically marginalized and oppressed people personal representation in government. The purpose of having representatives from each group was not to divide the people further. The idea behind group representation was that by allowing for the expression of divergent like-mindedness in legislatures, a new and shared like-mindedness could be formed, fostering a social unity to strengthen the political union. As a result, separate representation was intended not to crystallize pre-existing community identities, but to modify them and generate new community identities that could engage in free and equal exchange. It remains to be seen as to how far we have achieved that. Moreover, according to Ambedkar, it is not the historically dominant communities that need separate representation, but rather marginalized people who cannot find alternative means of securing representation for themselves. According to Ambedkar, a long history of persecution and marginalization, along with persisting systems of discrimination, this is far more insidious, was the most compelling argument in favor of separate representation for different communities. In addition to ensuring that underrepresented groups like Dalits, and now if we go further, and our equality jurisprudence has expanded it, there are far more invisible voices. And the march of our jurisprudence has opened up those vistas. These could not enter legislatures via traditional election procedures, now had a voice in the government, a place on the table. Separate representation created a safe environment for the representatives to interact openly and freely in legislatures. Ambedkar believed that to represent a constituency properly and to have a complete understanding of the minds and aspirations of the people comprising it, one needed to have lived through the experiences of those people. So, the whole concept of allyship, that I who do not belong to that community will espouse your cause, fails. It is you who belong to that community, who have experienced and lived through that discrimination, who ought to have that seat on the table, and not just as an ornamental representative, but as an active participant. Nevertheless, he expected the representatives to do more than merely speak for the people they were elected to serve. Now, this is where his vision went beyond what is now dubbed to be as a Dalit leader. He is not just a Dalit leader, he is a national icon. Why? Because he said that representatives are responsible to their people but must keep the larger society in mind while speaking for their constituents. So you see, the vision transcends mere representation, mere voicing the needs of your community. Your duty is to represent everyone. In this context, Ambedkar used caution while recommending that different communities have separate electorates. He conceded that separate electorates increase the angularity of division in society. For example, separate electorates exacerbated the division between the sectarian divisions, such as between Hindus and Muslims, and so on. Ambedkar was also worried about the possibility of members being elected through separate electorates because it would violate the concept of governance by consent. Still, they would pass legislation on all issues relevant to society. According to him, it would be troublesome if the British government granted separate electorates to landowners, traders, and merchants. So, separate electorates had to have a certain limitation. He argued that representatives of these powerful interests often stymied progressive efforts within narrow perspectives. He recommended separate electorates as an extreme step and a temporary solution for Dalits experiencing the worst levels of persecution. He emphasized that representatives should not limit themselves to representing the interests of their constituents. Gandhiji too saw the representatives' attitude towards the people as pivotal. A good representative to him was someone who upholds the values of truth and non-violence and has a heart for service in a disciplined and unselfish way. Ambedkar concurred with Gandhiji's assessment that representatives need to transcend their own sectarian, communal, or personal interests if they are to speak and act for their community, while also paying attention to the needs of the broader society if they are to herald a new sociality as agents of change. When seen in this light, Gandhi's focus on the empathetic character of the representative can strengthen Ambedkar's emphasis on relationality between a representative and his electorate. Given the interlinked nature of inequality encountered by Dalits, Ambedkar led the agitation for representation of Dalits in various legislature, administrative, public sector, banking and other industries, etc. In the case of Indian civil administration and service, the case of the Indian civil administration and services is particularly instructive. In 1925, the British government adopted a policy of communal representation to counter the monopoly of Hindu Brahmins in these civil services. In 1934, the policy was amended to extend similar provisions to others like Anglo-Indians, Indian Christians, Sikhs, Muslims and Parsis. However, there was no policy in place for Dalits, or what were commonly known as depressed classes then. The fallibility of a policy for underprivileged administered by the privileged was obvious to Ambedkar. Recent research substantiates his views. It shows that social inequalities are reproduced in organizations via the logic of meritocracy and efficiency, biases in selection, assessments based on culture and practices that advantage the privileged and disadvantage the underprivileged. Ambedkar concluded that a system of affirmative action or reservations, which are quotas, was the only means available to the marginalized to ensure representation of their grievances. He recognized that public services are often the only available means of employment for Dalits and other lower caste individuals, as opportunities in the private sector are severely restricted. Representation in public services served a second crucial function in bestowing government patronage on Dalits, which Ambedkar believed was a way of encouraging the spread of primary and higher education in the community. To safeguard their representation in politics, he argued that it was important to institute separate electorates to guarantee election of Dalit candidates, as I said earlier. This representational mechanism, that is quotas, envisaged by Ambedkar is different from the diversity initiatives developed in the West, specifically such as affirmative action. which all but survives in the name today, even as we speak. The latter depends on the indirect and immeasurable means to achieve equality, whereas Ambedkar's plan was more direct and measurable, and thus achievements could be monitored and evaluated. He felt that in the absence of institutionalized mechanisms for treating representation as a right, institutional representation of Dalits had to be increased by legal fiat. The need for such institutionalized representational mechanisms is evident in contemporary Indian corporations. Several private sector institutions and corporations have resisted the adoption of quotas based on the logic of meritocracy. Consequently, top positions in the elite professions, and as Disha mentioned, even the legal profession, are still predominantly occupied by more privileged people and upper castes amongst Hindus, or even, I would not even characterize only Hindu caste in Hindu society, but even privileged communities across the board, because privilege feeds on privilege. Even though they constitute a small minority of the country's total population. For example, despite the vast research showing the benefits of diversity to organizations, the higher castes among the Hindus, whose traditional occupation is trading and commerce, together constituting about 5 or 10% of the population, occupy over 80 to 90% of board positions. And I'm specifically talking of the topmost positions in the corporate sector. Maybe it's slightly better, but certainly above 70-75%. This slow progress towards equality goes to show why a clear and unwavering implementation of a state-mandated representational mechanism is a necessary tool. In short, a reading of Ambedkar reveals that inequalities are multidimensional and have deleterious effects on progress and well-being of individuals, organizations, and societies. Therefore, it is necessary to pursue a comprehensive set of reforms that would help the disadvantaged to gain equality in every sphere of life. To achieve equality for the marginalized, the mechanisms of representations and reservations offer positions as a matter of right to the historically disadvantaged. Such quotas challenge the myths of efficiency and meritocracy, as well as the normalization and reinforcement of social inequalities. Addressing caste-based inequalities is as relevant today as it was in Ambedkar's time. Debunking globalization's homogenizing myth, research has found that job clustering along ethnic and caste lines has remained an important feature of contemporary Indian society and industry. As dominant groups cornered well-paying jobs with better working conditions, the less glamorous, or if I may use the word dirty, increasingly casual jobs in the informal sector were left to Dalit migrant workers. I think the COVID has also exemplified and magnified this problem. Ambedkar's representational politics have contemporary global relevance as organizations develop diversity and inclusion programs to improve the presence of demographically disadvantaged groups such as women and ethnic minorities. For example, businesses in India have embraced diversity initiatives aimed at reducing gender inequalities, such as representation on boards, but resisted other types of diversity, such as those in relation to caste, religion, and sexuality. I am reminded of an argument which I had the occasion to make as a lawyer, and I was the only lawyer who was not designated as a senior in the TMA Pi case. And I did not appear for any of the institutions. I represented the teachers. So the case that I made out was a slightly different one. One of them was that when we talk of Article 15, especially Article 15.3, and that becomes a gateway for Article 15.4 too, because the language is identical. The argument was that in Article 15.3, can any school resist a private school? Can it resist a policy or a legislation which mandates that a certain proportion of its teachers or staff should be based reservations based on gender. Now, there is no answer to that. The only answer is that it violates my right to autonomy, etc. But then I think it's not that's not really the answer. The real answer is, what is the proportion? Because there you enter into the debate of reasonableness. So, likewise, if that is the case, that you can have reservations for women in educational institutions, in the staff, and I'm not talking of admissions, because there's a judgment by Justice Sujata Manohar talking of reservations in public services under 15.3, Vijay Kumar. That's the first breach. Now, once you say that, the question of proportion becomes important. Can you have 100%? I would argue depends. Yes, why not? If it's a single post of a dean or a warden in a women's college, a women's hostel, then why not? Because then it's the most appropriate. So it all depends on the circumstances. So likewise, I think in the future we are going to look at some affirmative action demands of this kind coming from communities, and maybe the states being under pressure from these communities, from Dalits and other underprivileged communities, demanding some kind of representation, which we all talk of as horizontal representation. So the horizontal application should not be merely confined to Article 15.2 or Article 17, which are the most acute, or Article 23, but it should go beyond. And I would say that ultimate aim would be to have an Equality Act, which provides for some kind of non-discrimination of all kinds, non-discriminatory rights of all kinds. Championed by Ambedkar, representation is a mechanism through which organizations can mitigate against socioeconomic inequalities within the wider society. However, it is far from enough. Even when marginalized individuals are employed, they face discrimination at work, in terms of assignment of undesirable jobs, stigmatization or bullying, lower pay, and slower career progression. These can occur particularly in the context of caste, because individuals from privileged castes who occupy managerial and executive positions have unfavorable attitudes. These are stereotypical attitudes toward affirmative action, and view the beneficiary of diversity as less competent. Now, a few anecdotes here. Maybe a Dalit gets in on the basis of so-called lower marks, but the moment he gets in, he has to qualify. He or she has to qualify in medical school. So when he or she qualifies, there are no handicaps. They have to qualify in the same way as any other. So I argue, as a counter-argument sometimes to the plea of merit, that what about people who get in through management quotas and pay lakhs of rupees into these seats? How merited are they? Are they more merited than Dalits just because they have money? All have to get through those exams, which are public exams conducted by the medical council, or under the same standards. So once you cross the barrier and get through it, and you come out as a doctor or an engineer, you're as good as any, because the system doesn't rely only on that one point of entry where you have got certain advantage of belonging to a certain community. But this, unfortunately, is not the way everyone believes, and everyone believes to be the case. The Ambedkarite Manifesto proposes that a system of inequality can be only countered by oppressed, and by them receiving the mantle to do so. His exposition of social justice in his seminal work, The Annihilation of Caste, is instructive. An ideal society should be mobile, should be full of channels for conveying a change taking place in one part to other parts. In an ideal society, there should be many interests consciously communicated and shared. There should be varied and free points of contact with other modes of association. In other words, there should be social endosmosis. This is fraternity, which is only another name for democracy. Democracy is not merely a form of government. It is primarily a mode of associated living, of conjoint communicated experience. It is essentially an attitude of respect and reverence towards fellow men. His idea of social justice is inclusive of political and economic justice too. He sought prioritization of social upliftment of the least advantaged, including minorities, Dalits, women, and workers. He believed that the caste system, communalism, patriarchy, and industrial exploitation of workers created inequality and stood in the way of just society. In his conceptualization, the idea of the constitution, of a constitution, goes beyond its traditional role as a mere set of rules and principles. He viewed extra-constitutional political mobilizations as replacing with contestations through constitutional paths. If mobilization follows a constitutional path, there is no place for violence or assertion of social inequality. Minority interests and voice seen in this light are central to the making and working of the Constitution. Ambedkar's conceptualization extends the Constitution's capacity to liberate and empower marginalized and oppressed groups. This emancipatory idea sought to address historical injustices, challenge systems of discrimination, and advance the cause of emancipation and equality. These are embedded in several articles, and you find that in standing out in relief in articles 15, 16, 17, 23, and 24. And the linkage, you cannot forget the linkage between 23, 24, 17, and 15 too. Because what is often missed is we think of the right against exploitation as a standalone collection of rights. But who were the most exploited? Who were the most oppressed? It was these marginalized groups. And where are they, and how are these rights to be worked out in every generation is always a challenge to us. While commentators and political actors have sought to argue that Ambedkar privileged Dalit interests over national interests and central interests over local interests, these dichotomies are obfuscatory. Ambedkar sought to privilege the constitutional over the political or the social. He sought to develop a total constitution where all political and social interactions would operate in a constitutional language. In this way, a non-majoritarian's public space could be constructed which afforded representation that had been historically denied to those disadvantaged communities and afforded equal opportunities to design public life as in the new republic. Then we often overlook that for Ambedkar, education was central, not merely as a tool for instruction. He emphasized secular education for social emancipation. The basic theme of his philosophy of education is inculcating values of liberty, equality, fraternity, justice, and moral character among boys and girls of all shades. Ambedkar identified two purposes of knowledge as those being acquisition for benefit of others and acquisition for one's own benefit. Education was assigned a revolutionary role in his conception of social progress and in his vision of a just and equal society. It was identified as a key instrument of liberation from oppressive structures of caste inequality and patriarchy, and a channel for construction of a new social order. Women were integral to this visionary egalitarianism and were consciously mobilized as political actors in the Dalit liberation movement led by him in the early decades of the 20th century. In the arena of formal education, a significant thrust was given to women's political involvement, and they played foundational roles as political educators and educational activities. He held that education must be available to all, irrespective of caste or status, and said that education is something that ought to be brought within the reach of everyone. Another facet of his contribution as a great nation builder was that he considered women to be the linchpin in the country's overall development. And this is a well-known quote, "I measure the progress of a community by the degree of progress which women have achieved," he said in the All India Depressed Classes Women's Conference held in Nagpur in July 1942. His approach towards women's emancipation was progressive, as he believed that social justice is possible only within a modern institutional framework. Thus, he promoted the spirit of constitutionalism that ensured equal rights and dignity for women. His contribution to women's emancipation is reflected in his works and writings, including Revolution and Counter-Revolution in Ancient India and Riddles in Hinduism. The question of social justice was central to his writings, and he talked about women's rights at a time when social structures were still traditional. Dalit and oppressed caste women were doubly marginalized in this social structure. His watershed contribution to women's rights was his effort in the passage of the Hindu Code Bill during the 50s. His zeal for these measures came from his desire to ensure that women's rights to property that was denied to them in the ancient Hindu law codes. The only property that they could traditionally own was the Stridhan, which restricted rightful access and was only possible within an endogamous marriage social structure. Through Section 14 of the Hindu Succession Act, a woman became the absolute owner of her property. Section 6, which was in a very revolutionary manner amended in 2005, dissolved the exclusive inheritance rights of property by male members. In 1948, Ambedkar had sent the completed draft constitution to the President of the Assembly, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, along with a cover note containing a confession about its departures from the objectives resolution, saying the committee had added a clause about fraternity in the constitution, in the preamble, although it does not occur in the objective resolution. The committee felt that the need for fraternal concord and goodwill in India was never greater than now, and that this particular aim of the new constitution should be emphasized by special mention in the preamble. To me, this is as central as the idea of liberty and equality, because without fraternity, those two are also incomplete, meaningless. Fraternity is not just handshaking of different people, but to recognize the I won't use the me in you, but to recognize the inherent in humanity amongst each other, to be humane. And unless we, and this is so intrinsically, in my mind, linked to the idea of equality, that having fraternity out, and fraternity is larger than a mere fundamental right, because it extends as a charter to people, from one person to another, that you have a duty. You owe a duty to everyone in society to recognize his or her humanity. They come through the same process, they go in the same process. As they say in the United States, even the President of America has to wear his pants one leg at a time, and if I may add, one trouser at one go, not more than that. So fraternity means the recognition of the inherent humanness in each of us. He has already spoken of it back in his 1936 speech, published as an annihilation of caste. He said it is only another name for democracy. Democracy is not a form of government. It is primarily a mode of associated living, of conjoint communicated experience. And this I read out earlier. And then his far-reaching vision for a radical representative democracy, articulated in his speech on the eve of adoption of the Constitution, is worth recalling, and now more than ever relevant. And I do not wish to read out the entire quote, it is quite large. He talks about why we should not maintain democracy merely in form but also in fact. And the second thing that we have to observe, the caution not to lay liberties in the hands of even a great man, or to trust him with power which enables him to subvert institutions. The third thing we must do is not to be content with mere political democracy. We must make it a social democracy as well. It means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, and fraternity as the principles of life. These principles are not to be treated as separate items in a trinity. And then he goes on to say what he means by that. And then the last one is very evocative and as relevant today, 75 years later, as it was then. We must begin by acknowledging the fact that there is complete absence of two things in Indian society. One of these is equality. On the social plane, we have in India a society based on the principle of graded inequality, which we have a society in which there are some who have immense wealth as against many who have lived in abject poverty. Where are we now? On 26 January 1950, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we have equality, and in social and economic life, we have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradiction? How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? As we now celebrate our 75th anniversary of our Constitution, which many predicted would not live long, and reflect on the triumphs of our attainments. At the macro level, there are many triumphs which we as a society can be proud of. Especially in this part of the world, we are drawn back to the same question. Has political equality, that is one vote, one man, one vote, or one vote, one person, with equal value, also transformed into equal worth of every person? This reflection is not only quantitative, it's not through statistics, but also a deeply internal process into which, within each of us, where we examine our role and actions in fulfilling those aims, if we are to attain the goals set out in the preamble of true equality, with dignity for all, and the chance to everyone to attain her or his genius and capabilities. This process is a continuing one, and while we underline representations through reservations which serve as important milestones, we must also look beyond it and insist that every human being has an equal access to common resources, the material resources of the nation. The sense of self-worth, dignity, and equality with attendant liberties is only realized when there is true equal opportunity to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for that thought-provoking lecture. I think it was truly inspiring, and honestly, I would take this opportunity to also mention that I had the good fortune and the privilege of representing in the EWS Challenge. And I would honestly urge everyone to really read sir's dissenting opinion in that case, because Dr. Ambedkar's ideology, I would say Dr. Ambedkar's understanding of reservations and representation is really reflected in that judgment. We've seen various judicial iterations and we've seen various judicial interpretations that say that reservations are about our policy decisions, reservations are an exception to equality, but I would say that Justice Bhat's dissenting judgment really stands out in a great way, and I would really urge everyone to read that. But thank you so much, sir, for this lecture, and I would invite Avinash now to give a vote of thanks.
So I'd like to thank you, Justice Bhat. I don't think anyone would have known that you had been given this at short notice, because it was so extremely well researched and detailed. I think with Dr. Ambedkar, what you realize is there is no end to what you can learn about him or what you can learn from his work. And I hope we can keep doing this for another 10 years, 20 years, and I'm sure even in the 20th year, you will learn something new when you come for this lecture. So thank you so much, Justice Bhat. I thought that you gave us a lot of real perspective about how the system is unequal, how boards work, how where the real positions of power, you see there is a complete absence of certain sections of our society. And I think that's something that we all need to take away, and we have to work on remedying this, both from the top and from the bottom, right? So I'd also like to thank our community of lawyers. Without you, none of this would be possible. We have so many students here. For a lawyer, an intern being in the office often is not a big deal. You say something, but for the student, it's everything, right? That one thing on their CV opens so many doors for them, right? And we are really grateful that you've stuck your neck out today. DEI is almost a slur, diversity, equity, inclusion. That's what we've reached today. And despite that, that all of you continue to contribute and stick your neck out means so much to us and to our community. So we're really thankful for that. I think just CEDE, and I'll just tell you how our system works. We have 2 cohorts each year. We invite applications. We have a very detailed process where we get a lot of information about the students, and we have to figure out how to choose the right student to see whether it'll be a fit for the offices that we have. It takes a lot of time. We have to collate, we have to look, we get maybe 250, 300 applications, and we have people who help us go through them. But our fellows, I'm going to name Kundan, Dipendra, who's not here today, Arsalan has helped in the past now. They sit and make sure that interviews are conducted, that each student is spoken to, right? That we figure out where they will do best in, right? What level of firm, whether a corporate firm would be good for them. And all of this takes a lot of effort, and we run on a shoestring budget. Often they are doing it just out of the good of their heart, right? Because they believe in the cause. And we'd like to do more to change that. But I'm so grateful to them. Anytime I message them at night, any time in the hour, they will respond to me instantly and tell me, this is what the position is. This is how we're going to go about it, right? So I just want to talk about Arsalan, right? So Arsalan is a fellow. Arsalan studied at AMU. He came in as a first-generation learner. Being in law school without knowing English is no mean feat. It is terrifying, right? Our judgments are not easy to read by design sometimes. There are judges who invent words. And despite that, there are these rays of hope and glimmers where people can stand through it. And as long as we at CEDE can make doors, open more doors, people like Arsalan. So Arsalan interned with Abhishek Jebraj at Isaac and Jacob, who's here today. He got an internship there. And then from there, he managed to actually intern with Justice Chandrachud, right? Finally, Arsalan was graduating. And my colleague, J. Rajesh, had just had a bad experience with a junior who had left. He told me, Avinash, I need somebody, right? And I said, I know someone. Take a look at the CV, right? And maybe Rajesh would not have really considered hiring Arsalan if his CV hadn't had the names that it did, right? This is a real way of it that it works, right? But he took a look and he said, I'm willing to give him a chance. He spoke to him. 3 months later, Rajesh, and I don't know if Arsalan knows this, but Rajesh came to me and said, you cannot believe how grateful I am to you, Avinash, for finding me Arsalan, right? And this is how it works, right? We have to keep trying to open doors, because at the end of the day, this change is only going to come from the grassroots, right? We have to produce good lawyers from the community, right? How are our High Court judges made? How are Supreme Court judges? Most of them come from the High Courts. How do you decide who's elevated to the High Court? It's whether you have a good practice. It's how much income you make, right? Whether that's right or not, the point is we have to develop great lawyers, and we have to make sure that these lawyers from the community have enough resources to do that. And that is our mission today. I'd like also now to thank our donors. Just a couple of large donations. It's 2-3 lakhs for us is a large amount, and it helps us sustain. So Ms. Saral Tangam, who's donated for a couple years, and Ms. Geeta GK, that's really what keeps us going. So we'd really like it if you could support us in any way possible, right? Whether you have some old commentaries in your office, all of these resources can really make a big change. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. It means so much. We were worried we wouldn't be able to fill the hall. Finally, we were trying to find chairs for people. please let us know if there's some way that you think you can help the mission. It need not be monetary. Again, it just could be taking the time to help somebody. Often what we realize is a good mentor means so much more than anything you can give them in a sort of material manner, right? So I'd like to thank you, and thank you, Justice Bhat, again for speaking at short notice.
Thank you so much, Vinas. As we draw closer to the 5th Dr. Ambedkar Memorial Lecture, we would like to request everyone to see the donation box outside and see how we can support our initiative. Thank you so much.